So today we are going to be diving into mission-driven leadership and how our professional development program, the Elevated Leadership Program, incorporates personal and organizational purpose to help participants develop as leaders and motivate their teams. As you may know, the Yale School of Management's mission is to educate leaders for business and society. The school's mission, coupled with the Elevated Leadership Program's vision of developing purposeful leaders across organizations and sectors, really inspired our webinar today. So what does it take to be mission-driven, and what does it mean to be mission-driven? In this webinar, Professor Barron, who I'll introduce in a moment, will share some research-backed insights that we hope will help you on your own leadership journey. One tool Professor Barron will employ today is exploring a case study. That approach is didactic in nature and fits the needs of this webinar. We do want to impart helpful insights succinctly and in the short time that we have together. However, the learning experience in the Elevated Leadership Program, ELP for short, is markedly different if you were to attend. ELP is a blended program hosted by Yale SOM Executive Education, and blended in this case means that part of this program is just delivered live online to you in the comfort of your home and your office, and part is delivered on campus in one of our classrooms at Evans Hall. The program is designed to strengthen your critical leadership capabilities, develop authentic leadership styles, translate leadership insights into actions, and it does this through assessments, coaching, discussions, a learning and action plan project that encourages you to reflect and act throughout the entire program. We know the most effective way for adult learners to absorb new lessons is through application, and that's what you'll be doing alongside a cohort of your peers. We're hosting ELP this fall, October 28th through November 7th, and I'll drop the program page link into the chat, or Rachel will, for you to explore it further. Enough of me. It's my pleasure now to introduce Professor James Barron. Professor Barron is the Faculty Director of the Elevated Leadership Program and the William S. Beinecke Professor of Management at the Yale School of Management. Professor Barron's research interests include human resources, organizational design and behavior, social stratification and inequality, work, labor markets, careers, economic sociology, and entrepreneurial companies. Welcome, Professor Barron, and thank you so much for being with us today. I'll let you take it from here.
Oh, thanks, Joanne. Welcome, everyone. Let me see if I can share my slides. Give that a shot.
Yeah, we'll get there. Looks like we're off to a good start.
Okay, is that
great?
Okay. So welcome. As Joanne said, we're going to talk a bit about mission-driven leadership, which is something that we care a lot about at Yale SOM. And I think it sort of relates to the program in the sense that we anticipate that many of the folks who would find this program of interest are kind of at a stage where increasingly they're going to need to promote and leverage some kind of purpose or mission to excite and engage the people around them. They're taking on responsibility for something a bit bigger, maybe not the entire enterprise, but a significant chunk of it. And so I want to spend some time talking about mission-driven leadership. And the motivation for this talk is my belief, based on talking to lots of leaders across very disparate sectors, that when you ask leaders today about the kinds of behaviors that they're striving to get more of from their workforce, you immediately come to the conclusion that there's a different kind of orientation that organizations need from their people. It's not just you need people that are motivated or taking part or involved, but you need a deeper level of commitment that I'm going to call engagement. And the kinds of behaviors that I hear leaders talking about needing to foster in their organizations are things like innovation and creativity, teamwork. I need people to act with integrity and responsibility and uphold our standards. I'm trying to promote goals around sustainability and around fostering a diverse workplace. I need people to create and transfer knowledge across silos within my organization. And I need a new kind of engagement with our customers or clients that's not just transactional, but is a sort of deeper, more empathetic kind of connection. And if any of those resonate with you, and I hope that they do, I think that it kind of quickly emerges that the traditional carrots and sticks that we teach in business school about how to get things done, extrinsic rewards and monitoring people, and measuring things. Those aren't going to get you terribly far. It's sort of hard to think about designing an extrinsic reward system that's going to foster the right amount of integrity and responsibility and support for sustainability or diversity. Those are things which, to succeed, people really have to internalize those objectives as their own in a deeper kind of way than just trying to dangle a carrot or threatening them with a stick. And I think that this is kind of nicely captured by this parable of the chicken and the pig. And I can't tell you how long it took me to find online a picture of a chicken and a pig, but I finally did. And the parable is this question: in a bacon and egg breakfast, what is the difference between the chicken and the pig? And the answer is that the chicken participated, but the pig was engaged, right? There was a deeper level required from the pig. Now, I'm not saying that's literally what we want from employees, but we do talk about skin in the game. And the purpose of this lecture is to talk about ways to get people beyond just participating or dropping eggs to literally have skin in the game. And so to harness engagement, I'm going to be arguing that you need to move beyond thinking about motivation to thinking about inspiration, something that is more, heart rather than head. Uh, Moving away from thinking primarily about incentives as the thing you dangle in front of people, and more about purposes that you can get people energized about. Again, moving beyond just sort of cognition to really thinking about how to emotionally connect with people and get them emotionally engaged. And that's going to require a different kind of leadership that leverages mission and vision and purpose, supported by some core values. I'm going to give you an example in a few minutes of what that looks like. But let me first say what I mean by mission and purpose. And this is a quote from a former colleague of mine, Jim Phils, who I think kind of nicely puts it that mission, as I'm going to be talking about it, is kind of the juice that gets people out of the bed in the morning, striving to show up for reasons other than just pure economic self-interest. It's what makes people passionate. It's what makes people feel there's a deeper purpose to what they're doing than trying to get a swimming pool, right? And I'm sure that all of you appreciate that these days talk about mission and purpose is omnipresent. Uh, the Beacon Institute that Ernst and Young created a few years ago. It's designed entirely to help their customers leverage purpose for competitive advantage. And there's all kinds of books, around this, the purpose economy, and so forth. Another way of documenting the increased attention that people are paying to mission and purpose and vision is captured by this thing I'm going to show you called a Google Ngram. And if you don't know what a Google Ngram is, I strongly encourage you to not pay any attention to what I'm going to say, because if you do, you'll waste massive amounts of time playing with it, as I do. But Google has digitized millions and millions of books going back to the 1500s. And you can input any person or word or phrase or place and any period of time, and it will give you a graph of how frequently that thing is being written about. And so it's a nice way of kind of capturing the zeitgeist in any sort of time period. And so if you do that with respect to things like purpose and vision and mission over the last, say, 40 plus years, you see a pretty smooth and continuous increase in people paying attention to these as levers for trying to get things done. And if you look at more traditional levers like organizational structure, you see that that's either flat or, if anything, declining. People are leaning less into things like formal organizational structure and more into informal things like mission and vision and purpose, as ways to get people to do the things that the organization does. And just to convince you that this is an accurate representation, that the Google Ngram is accurate, I gave it something to print out the trend on which I knew what the right answer was, which is references to me. And quite correctly, it shows that I peaked in about the year 2000, which I think anyone who knows me would agree with. In any event, um, one of the reasons for leaning into mission and purpose is that almost every audience we get here at SOM of executives is scratching its head asking, what the hell do I do about millennials and Gen Z? They just seem to have a different kind of orientation. And it's true that if we look at survey evidence, for example, this is a survey of millennials, you know, 84% of them said that it was either very true or somewhat true for them that making a difference in the world, doing something that I think has a deeper purpose, was more important than just being professionally recognized. And similarly, surveys of Gen Z show that they lean into purpose both in making decisions about where they're going to work. 83% said that's an important consideration, as well as what products they're going to buy. So hopefully I've convinced you that maybe mission is something worth paying attention to. And I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about a mission-driven organization that I've spent some time studying about. And it's perhaps a bit surprising that this would be a mission-driven organization, because this is not a company that is trying to find a cure for cancer, or that is engaging in education, or trying to make the planet greener. It's a company that makes furniture, chairs to be exact, and it's a company called Herman Miller that's now part of the Miller Knoll company due to a recent merger. And a number of years ago, the then CEO of Herman Miller, a guy by the name of Brian Walker, tasked a group of employees from throughout his company, all different levels, all different divisions, come up with a compelling mission that we can get people mobilized behind. And what they came up with as their mission was inspiring designs to help people do great things. Now, Brian Walker was an accountant by training, very hard-nosed guy, and he said, "This sounds nice, but it sounds like a slogan, and I don't want to adopt a mission that's merely a slogan." And so he was trying to figure out whether this was a viable mission. And what I want to do is show you two short clips. This is sort of bootlegged video, but Brian said I can use it. So it's not high production value, but it's him talking to his senior leadership team at an offsite about mission and strategy. And in this little story, he tells an anecdote about his teenage son, Sam, who needed to go with his wife to the eye doctor to get a new prescription for his contact lenses.
Sam and Colleen were going that day to an eye appointment that he had. Middle of the day, I get this note, a text message saying, "We got a problem. We're at the eye doctor. We need to talk to you right away." I waited a few minutes. I called her back. I say, "Hey, what's going on?" He says, "Well, I went to get my contacts updated, and they went through and they said I got an eye disease." Oh, okay. Well, what is it? Well, it's called retinitis pigmentosa. Oh, okay. What does that mean? He says, "They said I'm going to go blind." Whoa. The world sort of stops immediately. You're kind of in this freak out. So at that point, to be honest, I kind of thought this is probably an overreaction. It's probably one of those things that with enough drugs or doctors, you'll figure it out, you'll solve it. So I say, okay, you guys go home. Let me start doing some work. So I quickly jump on the computer, start doing the Google search. And the first article I get says, if you have this disease, there's two things you should know. A, it's not curable. There's a lot of research being done, but it's very rare. There's 50 to 100,000 people, so there's not a lot of money going into it. The second thing you should know is if you want to know what you should do, buy a cane and learn Braille.
So as an inquisitive guy, Brian continues doing research, and he finds that the leading place in America doing research on this disease is at the University of Iowa, a place called the Carver Eye Clinic, led by a Dr. Stone. And he decides to go there and visit and learn more about what's being done to deal with this disease. And he's led around by the head researcher, a guy named Bud Tucker, who happens to also be someone who injured his back some time ago skiing and suffers from intense back pain. And so he meets Bud, and Bud gives him the tour.
The person who took us on the tour was a head researcher. His name was Bud. And I started talking to Bud about why he was there. He was one of the guys that came from Harvard. And he said he grew up in one of the Canadian provinces, you know, like New Brunswick or something, small town, went to Harvard, said, you know, geez, I just didn't really like the atmosphere. Met Dr. Stone, and he recruited me out here to do this work. And he said, I'm the head stem cell guy. And in his office was something that was really interesting. He was sitting in an embodied chair. Now, he didn't know who I was at this point, so I said, hey, Bud, I'm curious, what about the chair? And he goes, well, he says, funny story. He says, when Dr. Stone recruited me out here, he brought me in and they were showing me all the stuff that they had, and he asked me if there was one thing that I really needed. And I said, yeah, I need this embodied chair. And he goes, because I knew that Harvard had bought my chair with money in their fund, and I couldn't take it with me. So he said, I told Dr. Stone I had to have an embodied chair. I said, well, that's pretty cool. I said, well, why'd you have to have an embodied chair? He said, well, I'm here all day trying to build these stem cells, and it's really tedious. And I'm staring into the screen all the time, and this was the only thing I've ever been able to find that I could sit for a long enough period of time to actually get my work done. If I get distracted, I can lose a whole day easily. I said, well, you're going to think this is funny. I said, I happen to be the CEO of the company that makes that chair. So Bud and I had this really interesting connection. So as you think about that mission of inspiring designs to help people do great things, yeah, we're not curing blindness, but maybe we're making it possible. Maybe we're making it possible. Because I would tell you, that's the first piece of equipment Bud asked for in this hospital, in this lab, that's actually trying to figure out how to grow retina stem cells.
So
the person who took us.
So if I can do this here, hopefully someone can help me with the chat, but I'm just curious to have you just chime in. If I ask you to describe Brian Walker as a leader in one word, like what's the adjective or what adjectives come to mind? How would you describe this guy? If there's chat, I'm not seeing it.
I thought this was inspiring, Jim, so I actually chimed in myself in the chat, and I see somebody's said inspirational, so definitely inspiring, visionary.
Inspiring, visionary. Okay, good. What else?
Empathetic.
Yeah. Right. Good.
Focused is another one.
Okay.
Two more. Aspirational.
Right.
And curious.
Sure. Certainly curious. Other things?
Yes, somebody said human, which I think is a really cool way to think about it.
Yeah, maybe, kind of not to, put words in anybody's mouth, but, there's a bit more, emotion from this guy than we're maybe accustomed to seeing from a CEO. He chokes up when he's talking about his son. So he comes across as a real person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And intelligent. That's the.
Okay. Intelligent.
But
Good.
the person said intelligent and empathic, and I wonder both and, right?
Okay.
Perhaps.
Intelligent. So kind of head and heart.
I like that. I really like that.
Yeah, I think we would also maybe agree that there's a lot of humility here, right? There's a lot of approachability. This is a guy, you just look at how he's dressed and how he talks, and he's not intimidating. He's very much sort of a guy you can imagine going up to and having a conversation with. Good. Any other characteristics that come to mind?
Anyone else want to chime into the chat? These are great, great words. I love them.
Yeah, this is an awesome list.
Open-minded, Jim. Oh, I got just Anna says open-minded. I love that.
Great. I like that as well. Anything else?
That's it.
So I think you've touched on just about everything that I would agree is a critical quality of Brian, except for one thing that didn't get mentioned, which is, I would say, this guy is a hell of a storyteller, right? He is very good at engaging you in this whole personal experience and conveying it in a way that draws you in. And I'm told, in fact, that at Herman Miller, which is very much a mission-driven company with a very, very strong culture, you cannot rise beyond a certain level in the executive hierarchy without taking a course in storytelling, because they believe that that is so critical to getting people engaged. That, you don't get people engaged through PowerPoint or Excel, right, or memos. You get them engaged by pulling at their heartstrings. And if you go onto YouTube and you input Herman Miller and stories, you will get a couple of hits on some of these classic stories that get told at Herman Miller over and over again, which is part of how they propagate their culture. Okay, so let me get back into, so why did I ask you to put that list together? I asked you to put that list together because I think that that comes remarkably close to providing a job description for a mission-driven leader. Those are precisely the qualities that you need to lean into if you want to move people through mission, right? Look at the things that we didn't put on this list, forceful, cerebral, intimidating, enigmatic. Some of the qualities that, I think if I asked our MBA students who are, younger and less experienced, they would say, oh, that's what a really good leader is they're strong and they kind of inspire, even maybe a little bit of fear and, no, this is exactly the opposite, right? That you engage people in a mission-driven organization by uh, by your humility, by leaning into your values, by being approachable, and so forth. So I want to just highlight, we've got not a lot of time left, so I'm going to have to go quickly, but I think there's a couple of things that you need to be effective as a mission-driven leader. The first is this kind of leadership that we've just discussed, and a particular way of thinking about how you make decisions, which a former colleague of mine nicely captured by saying that in a mission-driven organization, the decision-making logic is not a logic of calculation or consequences. It's a logic of commitment or appropriateness. We make decisions not because they're the optimal decisions, but because they are the decisions that resonate with our values and reinforce our mission. And so if you look at Herman Miller, for example, there's a number of things that people point to there in their history where the company made very costly, difficult decisions that they would not have made if they were simply making the expedient decision. For example, the Eames chair, which is their most famous piece of furniture, the contract for that requires that it be built in rosewood, but rosewood became an endangered hardwood, and Herman Miller has a strong commitment to environmental sustainability. So at the risk of being sued by the designers, they decided we will no longer make this chair in rosewood, not because that was an easy decision, but because it was the decision that undergirded our values and the things we stand for. Similarly, large part of their workforce in Western Michigan is quite conservative and religiously oriented, but Herman Miller decided to offer domestic partner benefits to their workforce, even though that was quite unpopular with a big segment of their workforce, because they have values around inclusion and diversity, and they felt like that kind of there's a moral imperative there. So the decisions that you make when you're mission driven are driven by adherence to that mission. There's a lot of things that my colleagues over in exec ed bring to us or could bring to us that we could do and make money doing at SOM, and we don't do them. And the reason we don't is because the faculty decides this is not promoting leaders for business and society. We could teach courses in Excel and a lot of things, which are fine courses to teach. But if your mission is to educate leaders who can function at the intersection between business and society, then that's where your attention should be focused, right? So one way you know if you're mission driven is, can you point to decisions that you're making that you wouldn't have made but for that mission? Interestingly, if you ask millennials what is it that they want from leaders, it is almost exactly the list that you all generated. They want inspirational, somebody who's interpersonally approachable, visionary, passionate. The one thing that they also say they want is a strategic thinker. And although we didn't explicitly characterize Brian that way, he very much is. And in fact, this speech that he gave is then followed by a speech about business strategy. And in fact, Brian is fond of saying, well, I love this quote where he says, a mission without a strategy is just a slogan, and a strategy without a mission is just a to-do list, right? So if you don't have both, if you don't have a strategic direction that the mission is pushing you in, then it's just vapid. And conversely, if you have just a strategy without the kind of emotional push that you get from a mission, you've just got a bunch of tasks. The second thing you need if you want to be mission driven, not surprisingly, is a compelling and prominent statement of your mission and purpose that has to help people understand what you are and are not about. And I used to teach a course here on mission-driven organizations, and so I have probably read more mission statements than any human being on the planet, and it's not anything I would wish on any of you. But people would ask me, well, what's a good mission statement look like? So here is my list of things that I think are the things that you want in a compelling mission statement. It needs to be strategic, as we just said. It needs to entail some clear way that you're going to differentiate yourself from other people doing roughly similar things. Ideally, it should be measurable. You should be able to gauge, are we in fact fulfilling our promise? It should be enduring. You shouldn't have a mission that changes every week. It should be brief. It should constrain you, as I just said. It should preclude you from doing certain things, like us not offering certain kinds of executive programs. It should be unique and distinctive. It should be kind of audacious and ambitious and passionate. It should get people excited. And it should be something that people can translate from the abstract down to, okay, I see what this means for me and how I show up and do my job. And that seems all sort of reasonable, but it's not hard to find organizations, even successful ones, that haven't necessarily hit it out of the park on this dimension. So if you look up the mission statement of Federal Express, it is produce superior financial returns for shareholders by providing high value added logistics, transportation, and related business services through focused operating companies. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, that's sort of my reaction to this. As opposed to, say, Southwest Airlines, admittedly a company that's had quite a bit of challenge recently, but about a decade ago, they refined their mission and purpose in a way that I think is really really nice. They said, we exist to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. So the why, we're not just flying people from Omaha to Hartford, Connecticut. We're trying to connect people to things that have meaning for them in their lives. And we do it through these three specific kinds of behaviors: being friendly, being reliable, and providing low-cost service. So a really nice, succinct statement of the why and the how. And a lot of effort in Southwest to reinforce that through a variety of kinds of internal and external communications. You need to have core values that are visible and clearly linked to your mission, right? Organizations all have core values, and you can go on the website and see them. But oftentimes it's very hard to understand why those, other than the fact that they sound nice. So I don't have time to go into it, but if you look at the core values of Herman Miller, every one of them is clearly linked to their mission and strategy. And you can see like, oh, okay, if you want to be a cutting edge design firm doing great things in society, then these would be the values that would be critical to accomplish that. And then finally, you need to have management practices that instantiate the mission. Okay, so does mission show up in how you recruit people? Does it show up in how you train and develop people? Does it show up in how you reward people financially and through promotions? And does it show up in how you communicate with people? And so the takeaways I hope from this would be, First of all, that if you want to be mission driven, you've got to formulate purpose-oriented people practices. Mission has to be front and center in all of the things that you do around developing, obtaining, developing, rewarding, and retaining your workforce. At Herman Miller, even members of the board of directors are explicitly screened on their mission fit. They're not just screened based on, well, we need someone who's an M&A expert. They have a detailed questionnaire that people have to go through in order to gauge whether this is a person whose values really are consonant with our mission. As I said, mission-driven enterprises and millennial-friendly enterprises require a particular kind of leader, like Brian. People who are authentic, who show up as themselves in a way that's approachable, that leans into affect and emotion and leverages storytelling, that focuses on employees and the social impact that the organization has, and that makes decisions prominently around their deep commitments and values, not just around what is expedient. So I hope that this might inspire you to think a little bit about, how well connected are you with your own higher purpose? Do you have a set of values and a vision around which you have a chance of inspiring and mobilizing and enrolling other people in whatever unit it is that you lead? And if you do, then are you powerfully and consistently, relentlessly articulating that and leaning into it, especially for millennials and Gen Z? And look, if Brian Walker can do this for chairs, I'm pretty sure that all of you can do it for whatever kinds of organizations you're helping to lead as well. So that's where I want to stop. I'm happy to hear your thoughts, answer any questions, and I know my colleagues from Exec Ed are also happy to tell you a little bit more about the program, of which this is just a little sort of tidbit. So thanks for listening, and Joanne, I'll throw it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jim. So fascinating, inspiring to hear from Herman Miller, CEO. Almost a little tear-jerking, and I really enjoyed listening to that and to your talk, so thank you. Folks, please feel free to go ahead and put any questions or comments either into the chat, into the Q&A, or feel free to raise your hand and I'll try to do my best to unmute you and make sure that we hear from you directly. In the meantime, I do have a few questions that we have had gotten ahead of time, so I'll go ahead and ask Jim to comment on those right now. And number one, you've already sort of mentioned this a bit, Jim, about millennials and how those differences in generations could impact leadership. But we've had folks ask, hey, I'm a rising millennial in my organization, I'm a rising leader. What can I do to influence senior leadership to adopt more mission-driven practices? So I think this question is about, I'm sort of in the middle here and I don't have a lot of influence directly on the company or other employees, but how can I influence my leadership to be more thoughtful, impactful, or mission-driven?
It's a great question. I think the best answer I can give you is, although there is a little bit of research about the bottom line consequences of being mission-driven, there's quite a bit of research about the consequences of being mission-driven for employee engagement. And then there's a lot of research about the consequences of employee engagement for bottom line organizational results. And we talk about that in the program. And so if I were in your shoes, I would be leaning into that research to say, look, here's the study showing how mission leads to a more engaged workforce. And here are the bottom line consequences. This is how profitability, productivity, customer satisfaction, employee turnover is profoundly affected by the engagement of our people. So if turning the dial on mission gets us a bit more engagement, and a bit more engagement gets us these large increases in performance, you ought to care about that.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is show the work, right? Show the data rather than, especially at that level where we might feel like we don't have a lot of influence, come armed with information, come armed with that data. Sort of a similar question, but I actually like the way that this one's twisted just ever so slightly. If somebody is in that position, sort of regardless of title perhaps, but without the power to make these broad sweeping changes, in addition to trying to influence senior leadership when it comes to adopting mission-driven practices. What can somebody at that sort of, I'll call it middle management, because maybe that's where the power dynamic comes in. What individually do you think other folks could do to be influential?
Well, I think, first of all, most of you on the call, I'm guessing, are not CEOs. So you're not doing what Brian is doing, which is trying to architect a mission for an entire company. But I'm guessing that all of you lead something, and there's no reason why that something can't and shouldn't have its own mission, ideally one that resonates with whatever the mission is of the organization as a whole. So to start with, tend your own garden and ask, to what extent are you cultivating, a mission that's getting people engaged. And if what I'm saying is right, you're going to have a better job at a better performance at attracting in millennials and Gen Z, getting the most out of those people, retaining those people, and hopefully you'll start to get attention from other people who are scratching their heads saying, "How the hell is Joanne getting those results?"
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it can feel a little intimidating to be the first person to start that conversation. But once somebody does, I bet they would be surprised by how many people might join them. Great question from Caroline here in the chat. In your opinion, what are the top 3 companies that are successful with their mission? You talked a little bit about FedEx and Southwest and the difference, but with their mission inspiring the workforce, how have you seen particularly companies, particularly the ones that come to mind for you? And I think Carolina makes a really good point, which is after the pandemic, people really made a show of saying, I want more purpose in my career. So maybe over the last few years, what companies, if you feel comfortable, do you think have done this really well in saying, yeah, this is our mission and this is why work is important?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I don't know that I can, accurately summarize everything that's happened since the pandemic. Certainly up till recently, I would have pointed to Southwest Airlines as an example. Incredibly lousy industry, just perennial underperformer, and over almost 50 years, a company that managed to get, way beyond ordinary results in a very unattractive industry by creating both a mission and a culture that attracted people who were inclined to deliver the kind of service and high productivity that company needed. Herman Miller, I think, would have been another good exemplar. They've undergone a major acquisition in the last couple of years. They've had a change in leadership. Brian is not the CEO. I think they've leaned away from their core values some. So I don't know that they are still today as compelling an example as they might have been a couple of years ago. I don't know. So those would be a couple of examples, but yeah, I don't know. I'm drawing a blank right
Yeah,
now.
that's okay. They have to come to this to the program to get the rest of the answer to that question. So, and on that note, there is a question actually about the ELP program, and this person is curious about how the program material works with nonprofit or works for nonprofit leaders who their core mission driven, but also trying to run an organization, rising leaders trying to figure out what's best in terms of best practices. So how does this work, or in what ways might it be different for nonprofit leaders versus larger corporations that you've mentioned?
Yeah. So, we not only invite, I mean, we eagerly welcome folks from sort of all sectors. And, on the first day of my class, I always say to people, I'm going to give you the answer to every question that I will ask throughout the entire course. The answer is, it depends. There isn't very much that we can tell somebody about how to effectively manage a workforce that doesn't depend on the context. So, in the case of a nonprofit, for instance, leaning into mission ought to be kind of a no-brainer. I mean, if you're a hospital, there's no excuse for not having a compelling mission, even though I've worked with many hospitals that don't have very compelling, our mission is to, cure illness. Okay, well, how does that differentiate you from any other sort of hospital? I would say that, if you're in a nonprofit where access to a lot of the tangible extrinsic levers that businesses may have at their disposal are not there, connecting with employees becomes even more critical. And so we have folks in the program who talk about getting that done at all levels, sort of at the organizational level, down to the very micro level of how do you talk with the people that you're leading. And I would say that I think that's particularly critical in a nonprofit because you don't have a whole lot of other levers that you can draw on. So getting the
It's
people part of the
interesting.
equation is critical.
You actually there's a comment here as well from John, who I think works, it sounds like in public education or education, superintendent. And he said he finds that if people know they can trust you, you can create a formidable team. So less of a question and more of a comment, but it really seems to resonate on the nonprofit space with, yeah, getting that buy-in from your employees. Okay, I think we have time for maybe the 2 more questions that are in here. And not a small question, as Heather has already sort of prefaced this with, which is, what does this all mean for higher ed right now? Our missions, our core values seem to have kind of come under fire, maybe, she says, kicked out the window, swayed by power or money. But what can we do as faculty, as management of institutions in higher ed? I guess maybe, what does it mean? What can we do? Like she said, no small question here, but what have been your thoughts over the last couple of months and maybe even longer?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking me to answer a question that it appears that, none of the people leading major educational institutions has yet figured out. So I'm not going to have the hubris to argue that, I have an answer to that. In this particular case, I think having and adhering to a mission is critical, but this is probably also an area where collective action is really necessary. I don't know that just being mission driven today, if you're a target of intense scrutiny, is going to be enough without being able to engage other similarly situated institutions
Yeah.
to sort of help push things in a different direction. But certainly, in my institution, there is a lot of navel gazing going on, asking about, do we really have an unalterable commitment to the mission that we've had in the past? And we're seeing here at Yale, a handful of our most prominent faculty recently departed to Canada, to the University of Toronto, and that's gotten people's attention.
Yep. Yeah. Jim, we are out of time. It is 12:45. Heather has thanked you. Appreciate taking on that question. Great leadership right there. So that's a nice comment. That's a nice compliment to get. It is 12:45. I do want to quickly just wrap us up to let you know what might be next for those of you that are thinking about potentially doing our program. So first of all, thank you so much, Professor Barron. Great, insightful conversation, great questions, great discussion. Really thank you everybody too for joining our call and sending us all those great questions. That engagement means a lot to us, especially with our short time frame here. And we're really looking forward to speaking with you more one-on-one, and that's mostly probably going to be with me. So I really encourage you to reach out to me individually. More than happy to hop on a call and answer your questions. So once again, just to underscore, we are hosting ELP, the Elevated Leadership Program, this fall from October 28th through November 7th, 2025. I hope you'll consider applying. I hope you are inspired to do so even more after our webinar today. The application itself is not a heavy lift. It includes submitting your resume or CV and a letter of intent, which talks about your professional background, your goals, and how those relate to attending the program. Lots more of information about details about the application on our website. And like I said, happy to chat with you individually. Whatever path you choose, I really do hope this time together was helpful. It certainly was for me, and that we can continue to be helpful along the way. I'll make sure that before we sign off, my contact information is in the chat here, so please don't be afraid to reach out to me. I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm also happy to talk more about resources, about the Elevated Leadership Program, Professor Barron's work. We will follow up in an email on all of this anyway, and I hope you'll let us know if you have any questions. With
Yeah, if you
that,
have questions for me,
yes,
please send them to Joanne, and Joanne will send them along. So
happy
I'm
to do that.
happy to engage with you all. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that. And I can confirm my email is in the chat. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out. So again, thank you to Rachel, thank you to Professor Barron, and thank you to all of you for being part of our chat today. And I'm really looking forward to staying in touch. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.